Have you ever wondered if watching TV has impacted your view of yourself and the world? Well, me too. Almost everyone watching this speech owns a television and watches at least 1 hour every day. How we spend our time is important to who we are as a person and our beliefs. I think it is important that we understand TV's impact of ourselves and how we view the world. My name is Maddie, and I'm going to be talking about the cultivation theory today. I will explain what this theory is, how it relates to everyone watching this speech. I will then compare and contrast how 3 different authors view this theory, and lastly, I will explain how viewing violence can have an impact on ourselves and our behaviors. This cultivation theory provides a reasoning for why we think about ourselves and the world the way that we do, and how violence impacts our view of the world. It can best be explained in terms of the media television. The cultivation theory was introduced in the 1960s by George Gerbner and was mainly introduced to look at TV's impact on its viewers. It is known as a critical theory, and it examines how media is used in social systems to build a consensus on positions through shared assumptions. This is according to the author Shanahan. In other words, those people who are exposed to media will interpret the world in the way that it is portrayed in this media. For example, if TV constantly portrays Chicago as this dangerous city full of crime, then people not from Chicago will start to associate it with crime and as a dangerous place to live, when this is not always the case or reality of Chicago. Another example of this is the sex roles that we see on TV and in real life between men and women. This theory most often is talked about in terms of television because they are in nearly every home and provide a sort of reality, kind of so that TV is a world in itself. Watching a great deal of TV can be associated with a tendency to hold the specific conceptions of reality that are consistent with the images we see on the media. This basically means that the ideas we see on TV, we start to believe and make our own. This influence of TV on our daily lives can be broken down into 3 parts: excitement, imitation, and transfer of attitudes and values. Watching TV elevates our emotions in itself, and in watching scenes of violence or aggressive behavior can elevate our emotions and cause us to act out more aggressively because our emotions are already high. Imitation can be seen by people reenacting scenarios they see on TV the same way because they're familiar with it and have seen it be handled before. And then transfer of attitudes and values. Watching constant television and the same attitudes on TV can cause us to hold those kind of beliefs for ourselves. I looked at 3 articles and their viewpoints of this theory. The first article showed on how TV violence causes audiences to act out aggressively. The second article goes over what this theory is and gives criticism of this theory. The third article talks about this theory again and how it can be applied to real life and as well as television. The article written by Daleen in 2023 gives a counter to their argument that watching violent content can cause viewers to act out more aggressively. She stated people who are violent might purposely watch violent shows on TV to validate their feelings. Pereira, another author, then goes on to criticize this theory by saying this theory uses methods of social sciences to address questions of the humanities, when these are 2 completely different topics, so how can you use one to address the other? That doesn't necessarily make sense. The last article that I used states TV is the best medium because most people have a television, although other mediums such as magazines, and computers and phones and everything else can have an influence, but not as much as TV, just as how widely it's spread out in every home. 3 articles agree that Gerbner created this theory in the 1960s, and that it is discussed in terms of television and possibly can be used to describe violence as well. As I talked about earlier, the cultivation theory can be discussed in terms of violence. Meaning, how does watching violent TV impact our behaviors in the world? One concept discussed is called the mean world syndrome. According to Pereira, this means that when viewers are exposed to violent content, they are more likely to believe the world is more violent than it actually is. A good example of this is the show NCIS, which is my favorite show personally. Um, this show is about violent crimes and shows harsh and crime scenes, different crime scenes in every episode. Watching this often can cause viewers to believe the world is more dangerous and that these violent, harsh crime scenes actually happen way more often than they do. Daily New researchers found that American TV specifically has 10 times more violence than the real world. And it is often thought that children learn their violence from television and viewing different medias. However, this doesn't always mean that they go to imitate it. This is a topic that researchers seem to disagree on hugely. Pereira criticizes this theory by saying that the correlation between TV and fear of violence through the mean world syndrome can be misleading because of a third factor. This third factor could explain people our fear of violence by their lived real world experiences instead of what they view on TV. Something that has completely nothing to do with this theory and kind of is a criticism about it. I believe this is something to think about, that this theory has some criticisms like every other theory, just something to keep in mind. Overall, this theory is important about talking about how TV and overall this theory is important when talking about how TV and other media impacts our daily values and lives. To review, this speech went over what the cultivation theory is, who first discovered it, compared and contrasted the three different articles used in this theory, and how this theory can be used to relate to violence in the media, and how viewing it can cause people to be more violent than they actually are. One thing, if anything, to remember from this speech is that the cultivation theory describes how people who are exposed to media will act out in their daily lives.